Okay, so we're here to talk about Vue. So here are some of our objectives for the first part of this course today. So explain what Vue is, explain some differences between Vue and React, because that is kind of a little bit of the precursor to this that y'all have used. Everyone's versed in React, right? You know kind of what's going on? All right, cool. Define the 3 parts of a Vue component, because there are 3, and then list 3 built-in directives. And what is a directive? We'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, can anybody tell me what is Vue, or what Vue is? Don't overthink it. Is that what you're going to say, Austin?
Not bad.
Yep, a front-end framework. That's it. All right. Yep, it is a front-end framework. Cool. Some other front-end frameworks?
React.
Yep.
Angular.
Yep. Vue. Any of the other ones? Oh, fucking Flutter. Yeah, that is the thing, right? And that's a framework for Dart, which, okay, I'm not even going to talk about that. So is it React? Like, no, it's not React. It has a really different syntax. There's no JSX. It doesn't have separate CSS files. You can build them separately, but just the way that we're going to be building components, all of that will be together. Use its own directives. So like in React, you use all JavaScript. Right? You have maps, you have filters, you create constructors for classes and super props and all those things, right? You don't have that in Vue, right? So it is a little bit more magical than React is, whereas React, you're writing a lot of like exactly what needs to happen. Vue handles a lot of that behind the scenes. So it's really nice.
Handles DOM manipulation as well, like React?
Uh-huh.
Okay, cool.
And Vue components also have their own file types. They're all .vue, right? React, what are they? .js, right? So it's just a basic JavaScript file there. Here, Vue has its own specific type of file. Cool. But it is similar, right? You still have state, right? You still have props. You pass props to the children of the parent component, and it still has that one single entry point, which in React, I think it was always the index.js. It was taking app and injecting it into your index.html. Right? What is the difference between a single page application and a multi-page application? Anybody tell me? Sorry?
Like reloading the page.
Maybe. Would you elaborate a little bit on that?
Like a single page, you can like get to a different portion of the page but without refreshing.
Yeah, absolutely. And why is that?
Faster.
It is faster, absolutely. But typically in a multi-page application, you're loading an HTML page for each one of the links that you go to, right? Which is why it takes longer each time. Single page, there's one injection point, there's one index HTML, and it loads all that JavaScript to help like dynamically change what views you're seeing on the page, right? So just like React, you have one index HTML, and it's got one JavaScript file that injects all that extra code that you write into that index HTML. Questions? That's just like a front-end framework thing, not a Vue thing. Cool. All right. So the Vue component parts. I want everybody to take like 1 minute and pull up the Vue docs and check the getting started section, because it can be kind of confusing there. So I'm going to put a minute on the clock. Just take a look at the getting started on the Vue docs. That's about a minute. Did y'all see this? There you go. Yeah, this kind of syntax right here, we're not going to be writing anything like that. So what this is doing is it's like creating a new instance of view, and you're supposed to inject it into like a div somewhere in your application. Right? We're not doing that. That's for like really small things that like JavaScript just kind of helps like make the page look kind of cool instead of JavaScript being like a part of the core functionality of it. Also, with this syntax right here, there's not as much syntax highlighting, which for me is like hugely important as far as being able to see where I didn't close a tag or where my parentheses are open or closed or whatever. Like I need the syntax highlighting to help like guide me through that. And you don't get that with this syntax. So all this to say, when you are looking through the docs, be aware that this is not the way that we are going to be writing it. What we are going to be, so that's one way, and the other way is what we're actually going to talk about, which is these three parts. And let me put this back in presentation mode. It's the template, script, and style. What do you think the template is? What goes in that tag? Yeah. The HTML, right? Yeah, exactly. Script. The logic, right? That's where all your JavaScript, or if you want to do TypeScript, like you can. And then style. Woo! There we go. This is literally what every Vue component will look like. If you like really like the way Angular organizes, fine. But like, you can just have these three things within your component, and that's the structure, right? So I always start each component. I do template, script, style, and build those three tags out. And I'm like, okay, what do I want to do in each one of these things, right? So that's it. So there's a clearly defined organization for each of your components, right? So whenever you're like, I don't know what to do, template, script, style. Same. What do you do when you start a React component? Does anybody remember? Right. You import React from React and maybe a component from React as well, and then you're like class blah 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 extends da da da, and there's a lot of like class-based like object-oriented programming syntax that goes into that, right? With Vue, it is just template tag, script tag, style tag, and that's it. And that's how you start, right? It's a little bit easier, and again, there is a lot more happening behind the scenes that you are not having to like explicitly write out. Questions? Yes.
I have a question. I may not be able to ask it properly yet, but you were saying before, so with Vue, you could have like an HTML file in a CSS file in a Vue file, essentially just like we would a JavaScript file, right?
Yeah, it's very similar, yeah.
We could do that, but like with React and Angular, you would have the whole like framework scaffolding around it. Like you couldn't just
inject it. There are ways that you can like inject like an Angular component into your big vanilla application, right? Same with the React component. There are ways to do that, and it has a lot to do with the way that Babel, which we will talk about in a little bit, like trans or compiles that code to be just like basic ass JavaScript. But like with Vue, so if you have these three tags, like if you wanted to like make a separate file for your CSS, you just import it into your Vue file, and it functions the exact same way, right? Same with your scripts. Like you just, if your component gets to be like 1,000 lines, like break it up into more components, because that's a lot of logic for one thing, or helper functions. But like you can have, like with Angular, you have a folder, and you have your like TypeScript file, your HTML file. I think it's an HTML file. I don't really know. And yeah, and then your style file, right? You can organize that way here too. So there's nothing stopping you from doing that. But to do it more simply, you just put them all in the same file, and then as you like build that out, if you want to like, what's the word when you take away logic from one file? You basically break it up into smaller pieces, right? If you want to do that, you can. But generally, there are just these three pieces to each component.
Cool.
Other questions?
With these three pieces in each component, how are they separated?
With tags.
Okay.
So
Sure,
there's,
tell us what that
Yeah, so there's just a template tag, same as like an element in your HTML. You have like an H1 or an H2 or a P tag.
Okay.
You just have a template tag, closing template tag, script tag, closing script tag. Yep, and a style tag. Another cool thing about style is you can scope your styles. So that means that they don't ever leave that component. So you can be like, I'm styling the P tag, and you don't have to class it, which is kind of nice. Other questions?
And it just styles out one P tag?
And it just styles, well, it depends if you only have one P tag in that component, but yes.
Oh, it just lives in there.
Yep. If you use the scoped keyword, those styles only touch that component. Cool, so directives. What the fuck is a directive? I don't, like I had to like Google it to like figure out what a good way to explain it was, right? Because these are things that are built into Vue that do stuff, right? A special token in the markup, HTML, that tells an element to do something cool in the DOM, right? So, can anybody think of what some things that might be directives? What some directives in Vue might be? That's the question I'm trying to ask. Ooh, you bring up something really good. Events, right? There are directives for events. So that's one. Anybody else got any other guesses? Yeah, what's up?
Like toggling if something displays.
Ooh, yeah, conditional rendering. Yeah, absolutely. Nice guesses. Anything else? Going once? Going twice?
Is it all DOM stuff, or could it be other things too?
It could probably be some other things too, but it's generally DOM stuff. Yeah.
I mean, just like adding and removing elements, like mapping through an array to generate stuff.
There we go. Yeah. So looping through like an array to create a component for each item in that array. There's a Vue directive for that. Routing, there is a Vue router, but that isn't exactly a directive, right? There are like special tags. Good guess though. Okay. So we got event handlers, use like v-on, creating multiple elements, v4, binding props, use v-bind, which there's another shorthand for that, and then conditional rendering, v-if, right? So if you have touched Angular at all, these are all really similar to what Angular uses, but they're like ng4 or whatever, right? So if you stole some of that from Angular. So as far as event handlers, like the syntaxes for all of these things, you're going to forget, right? I'm not even going to bother telling you. You're going to forget. But if you come over to the Vue docs, if we're like, okay, I want to do an event handler. So I'm like, Vue event handler. Event handling, cool. There we go. v-on : the event you're listening for, and then the function. Okay, so in React, you wouldn't use quotes here. What would you probably use?
JSX.
Right, you'd throw in your curly brackets and you write some JavaScript in there. We just got quotes. Single quotes, double quotes, doesn't matter. All right? So obviously this doesn't have to be like, you don't have to write a raw function right there, right? You can break that out into your script section and then call it. But that's kind of what the syntax looks like. And for all the directives, it looks really similar. So if you want to bind props to an element, right? Why would you want to do that again? Why do you ever want to bind props?
So they can share information.
Right, so they can share information. So I'm parent component, my child component over there. I'm making 10 of them, and I want to bind the current element in my array to each one of those that I create, right? So we need to bind the props to it so that it can display exactly what I want it to. Looks exactly the same, except it's v-bind. And then, here, I'll bring that up again. So this is event handling. So What do you think we should Google for binding props in Vue?
View binding props.
Yep. Oh, see, here's that syntax again. Beware. All right, that's not what we're looking for. Prop types. So that's what it looks like in the child component right here. And we'll get into all this again when we start to actually build something, right? This is just kind of like a precursor to like look at some of the things that we can do in Vue. So this is what it looks like kind of in React, but not quite, right? You have the what you're calling it, and then you do equals and the thing you want it to be. But this is kind of what it looks like in Vue. There it is. So v-bind, colon, the name of the thing, and this is the part that always gets really confusing. This is why, look it up, it's okay. It's what you're calling it, and then equals the actual value that you're passing in. So here, we're passing something in called title, and we're calling it title, and then we're actually giving it the value of post.title. When we do it, you'll see like that gets a little bit confusing if it's not right now. Any questions about this so far? Things you can do.
So is the value of post.title coming from anywhere, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So that would be coming from our data that is in the script tag.
Okay.
Let's see.
The same as like when you bind like this in React?
So you don't ever have to bind this in Vue. So the context is always there, and you don't need to manage that. So like you don't have to use an ES6 function or use an ES5 function and bind this. You just write your function, and then you just call the function in your. You don't even use this a lot of the time. Cool. So we got creating alternate elements. Use a v4, v-bind, conditional rendering, v-if. And who can tell me what a directive is?
Tells an element to do something cool with the DOM.
Yeah, right? It's like a token on an element that tells it to do something cool in the DOM. Exactly. Cool. So we know what Vue is. What is it? Yeah, super simple, right? Some differences in Vue and React. Can anybody name me one difference? Yeah, what's up, Austin?
JSX.
No JSX. That's what's up. Has anybody got another one?
The components just have three tags on them to start working in each component.
Exactly. So they have all the stuff you want inside of them already. You don't have to break it out, and it's super structured in that way. Excellent. Give me one more. Anybody? One more.
It has its own file type.
Yeah, great. It has its own file type. What was that extension? .view. Good deal. The three parts of a Vue component. Template, script, style. Every single time. What's in the template? What's in the script? Say JX or JS? I was like, oh, no JSX. And then style. There we go. Cool. Y'all got it. And then 3 built-in directives. Theon. What is that?
Event handler.
Yep. VF. What is that? Conditional rendering. And then V4. And what's V4 do? Yeah, it loops and creates multiple elements, right? And we haven't talked about how we do that yet, but that is what that is for. This is V4. Yeah, I'm good. All right, so now what I'd like y'all to do. Yeah, question.
Is there only like 4 directives, or is there like a bunch more?
There's not a whole lot. Those are like 4 big ones. I don't know exactly. I'd probably say there's probably like 6 or so. But it doesn't get a whole lot more complicated than that. And you can build custom directives if you want to make it more complicated, or you have a need that like the basic view framework isn't satisfying, that you're going to use all over the place, but I've never run into a situation where I needed to do that.
Do most what you need to do with those 4?
Yep. Cool. Now, take a couple of minutes. Has anybody installed the Vue CLI? Take a few minutes and do that. Whenever you get that installed, just give me like a thumbs up or a wave or like a chair spin or something.
Which viewing size just NPM install view?
I don't remember. Let's go look.
It is a little.
Because I-
It looks like @view/CLI.
Yeah. That sounds a little bit closer because just Vue would install the framework, but we want the CLI to be able to build us a project, kind of like Create React App does. So once you get that installed, go ahead and just kind of hack and slash your way through that. Just create a Vue project, pick whatever you want as far as the options goes. It doesn't really matter. I'll walk through those, but just try it out one time. All right, and if you got a project created, give me a thumbs up. Cool. Again, when you're creating the project, don't worry about what dependencies you're putting in there. Just take a look at them, get familiar with it, and then we'll walk through it. Is that too small up here?
Does it matter which presets we pick?
Nope. Take a look at them. It's just to kind of familiarize you and yourself with it a little bit. Oh, it's loading. Cool. Everyone's Gucci.
It's loading.
Loading. Cool. All right, we all up and running? Okay. All right. So I'm gonna come over here, and this is actually a mess. I'm gonna open a new window. Can y'all see that? Visible? Cool. What was the command to create a view project again? I'm gonna call, and then the app name. So I'm gonna call it trial 1. Ooh, so I have like a standard that I set up. We're gonna go to manually select features because, why not? So, Babel. What is Babel? Does anybody have a guess? Because I didn't really know until a little bit ago.
Like the language transpiler.
What the fuck is a transpiler, though?
It tiles things across.
That's a very good definition. Thank you. So Babel is exactly that. It is a transpiler, which compiler and transpiler are kind of used interchangeably. I haven't seen any real difference. If you find one, let me know. But so its job is to take code that is not like basic JavaScript and turn it into basic JavaScript, right? Because a lot of browsers still aren't reading ES6, right? So a lot of times you have to have a transpiler or a compiler that changes it to something like pre-ES6 to like ES5, so that like browsers can read it and they know what to do with it. So that's what Babel's job is, right? TypeScript, CoffeeScript, all the JavaScript like extra things that are built on top of it, it takes that and it makes them JavaScript, right? Because what is the language of all browsers? JavaScript, right? And they're not, browsers aren't built to do all of that language compilation on the fly, right? Which is when you go to deploy your React app, what do you have to do? What do you do before you can deploy your React app? Have y'all deployed a React app before? Yes. Yeah. What's the thing you got to do before deploying? Austin?
I don't think we've done this, but aren't you supposed to build it?
Yeah. Right? And when you build it, it creates another folder that just has some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in it. And if you look at that JavaScript, it looks like trash, right? It's like function A, and then your parameters are like A, B, and C, and then it's just it's unreadable, right? You can figure it out if you look at it for long enough, but there's a reason we use good variable names and good function names, because we want to know what the hell the functions and the variables are, right? So anyway, Babel, transpiler that takes not old school JavaScript and turns it into that, so all browsers can read it. Cool? I'm going to ask you all about that again in a minute. We are not messing with TypeScript because I don't know what I'm doing with it. I think y'all probably know better than I do now, since you talked to Inmuta for the last hour or so, right? So if you want to go the TypeScript way, by all means. We are not going to be doing that in this. Progressive web app support. Also not going to be doing this. What is a progressive web app though? Anybody? It's like an app that you can still use offline, pretty much. So whenever it gets service, it can like pull all the new information and send all your new information off, but it caches everything so that you can use it offline. We're not going to be doing that either, right? You remember that service worker in React? That's what that's for. Router. Router's cool. What's a router? I'm going to make y'all explain every single one of these things to me, by the way.
Essentially, it lets you switch between the user pages.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it throws something up in the URL for you too, and it has like history features and all sorts of other stuff. View router's dope. I like it a lot. Not particularly hard to use. We will go over that in the next 3 days.
Similar to React Router?
Very similar.
Okay, cool.
We're not going to do that for now. Vuex. Guess? Austin?
Yes. JSX review?
Nope. Good guess though. Anybody else? There's another library that ends in an X that you use for React.
NVX?
Starts with an R. Yeah. Yeah. So it is not Redux, but it is similar to Redux in that it is like a global state management library, right? Vuex is not particularly hard to use. It's far easier than Redux. We are not going to mess with that. Okay? But just know that's what it's there for. It's to manage all of your state over here, and your application, you can just feed each component what it needs exactly. You don't have to do the like, we start an app and then go down and then go down and then branch off and then go down again, and following those like pathways can be a huge pain in the ass. Cool, CSS preprocessors. I don't really know what that is. Anybody else? Yeah, what's up?
Isn't that used for SAS and SCSS?
Maybe so. So like when you write your SCSS, it compiles into CSS, and that is the pre-processing before the build phase. That makes sense to me, but I can't say for certain. Linter formatter. What's that? Yeah, and make sure you're abiding by the rules of your linter, which sometimes is a huge pain, but overall, like, it will help you as far as code consistency goes. Noticing things like trailing spaces, or you're using semicolons all over the place except this one file, right? And you have a linter and you can set it to whatever rules you really want. Question?
So do you need any other like extensions in VS Code
For Vue?
Or is it done all through that?
It's done through this, so you'll have that as a dependency for the project. So like on your kind of compile time when you're building it for just like your development view, like it will yell at you in the command line. It's not gonna like break it, but it's like, yo, you got a trailing space here, and you have a semicolon here, and you didn't have a space before your function parentheses or something, right? And it'll list out all the errors, which is kind of a pain in the ass, but it's good because you're like, okay, I need to stop doing that because the linter is like, when you go to work for a company, they should have kind of a standard of how they want you to write code, right? Because it helps when your code base is somewhat cohesive in terms of style, so that you can look through and be like, everything's written similarly. I don't have to like readjust every file I go into. I recommend linters and formatters.
What is a linter?
A linter is something that goes through your code and it has a set of rules that it is looking to see if your code is following. So like I use JS standard generally, which is like single quotes, no semicolons, 2 space tabs. Like sometimes on weird functions you have to put a space in between the name and the invocation, but only on some. I don't really know what the difference is. So it just has rules, and it looks at your code and sees if it follows those rules. It's not really looking to see if your code works, it's just looking to see if you follow the rules as far as formatting. Cool. Unit testing. What is that?
Just allows tests.
Yeah. Yeah, what kind of tests? So we have two different types of testing, and I'm just kind of curious, like, what the difference between unit testing and end-to-end testing are.
I'm just gonna take a walk as like
Perfect.
components. Like,
Yeah. So unit testing, you can test components, right? So you can do things like shallow renders and check to see if it has a certain like lifecycle hook, or that it has certain data attached to it, or that there is an H1 that is rendering whose value is 3, right? It is to test all those things and also to test your functions. In basic JavaScript, like unit testing is specifically for just a function. You're like, all right, you do the red-green testing where you like write a test so that your function fails, and then you write your function, and then you're like, does it pass? No. Okay, I need to make my function better or change my test, right? The point of testing is to have more maintainable code. I don't know if y'all's curriculum has a whole lot to do with it, but it's something to play with because a lot of companies do like you know something about testing. Some cool things are like Mocha and Chai, or for end-to-end testing, something like Cypress. So end-to-end testing is a good definition though, D. Thank you. End-to-end? Anybody? So
And when you said unit testing is for a function, I'd imagine end-to-end is sort of between functions or chaining them. So like from what the user sees, like this start to the end of whatever, how many functions you need to have. Like, can I successfully add a user and then do like the text input, how it handles the object, then the server, like
yeah.
the whole process?
Yeah, pretty much. But it is from the user's perspective, right? So you're not testing behind the scenes. You're testing like the flow that the user goes through. Like user arrives on homepage, clicks, add new user, enters information, submits, enters that same information into login. Like kind of that flow of the user to make sure that like what you're thinking is supposed to happen is happening regularly, right? We're not going to do either one of those. Cool. But they're both very cool and something that you should spend some time looking at. Neither one are particularly hard. There's a lot of good tutorials out there. Testing basic JavaScript first and then maybe going into React or Vue. Cool. So we're just going to do Babel and my linter. Enter. I'm going to do ESLint and the JS standard config. I'm going to lint on save. Lint and fix on commit. I'm like, if it actually fixes, that's great, but I don't trust it. I never trust it. But things like Prettier are also fantastic because you save and they fix your code. I prefer to go back myself and do it though. That's my personal preference. Where do you want to place these things? I'm a big advocate for separation of concerns, so I don't want it all in my package.json because then my package.json is managing all sorts of info that I don't think it needs. So I want dedicated config files. Do I want to save this preset? I don't care. I'm going to say no. If you do, it's just going to give you an option to type in a name, and next time you do view create, it'll have it there. I'm going to say no. It's not Christmas time anymore. Did that sound like a Christmas song to anybody else? Okay. We're riding in a one horse. Yeah, I don't know. My mom used to sing it all the time. I don't know why it just came out then.
So where would you put those dependencies back? Package.json?
So there's an option, like your package.json can dictate what all of those configurations are, but we have an option to either store those configurations in the package.json or separately as config files. The Vue CLI takes care of that for us. So like I don't actually have to make anything. I just say, you do this. And it's like, okay. So I'm going to cd into trial 1, and then I'm going to bring this up in VS Code. So for instance, like we have the editor config, the ESLint, rc.js, the Babel config, and like these, there's not really anything in here, right? You got some rules. The editor config, this is just like indent style, indent size. Like things that you don't necessarily need to mess with, but if you want to, now there's a specific file for it and you can go in there and mess with it, which I prefer. Again, if you want them on your package.json, go for it. To each their own. But I like this. It's already like kind of a lot of information. This one's kind of short, but you know, it gets longer and longer. So this is our Vue app. Cool. So let's go over some of the parts of it. We got node modules, right? It's no different than what you do with React. What are node modules? Yeah, they're the libraries that your like project is depending on, right? So they're all your dependencies and their dependencies and their dependencies, right? Because if you look here, the only dependency we have is Vue, but we have a lot of node modules. Yeah.
Would we put that in the git ignore?
Yes, and also it creates a git ignore for us. But why would we put those in the git ignore? That's a great point.
Well, from what then, so that when you're uploading, you don't always upload all these modules as well, save space.
Right, because it saves a lot of space, a lot of time as far as upload, and nobody needs them. Like that's part of the, you clone it, and then first thing you do, you're like, npm install. And since you have this package JSON, that tells your project everything it needs, right? So you don't want to git ignore that, you need that. But like node modules, it's just a lot of extra space that you don't need to be transferring. All right, so we know node modules. Public. We got a favicon and index.html. So what's the favicon? Icon, where's it go? Not quite. There's another place for it. It is generally like it's the same thing that's there, but where does the favicon go? Where's my browser?
It's up on the browser page.
Yeah.
Tab page.
Yeah. The little tabs. Those are the favicons, right? They can be a pain sometimes, but they go in your public folder. Cool. Index.html. This is the index.html that is being loaded by the web page, right? You see we've got this div with the ID of app, and this nice little comment here that says built files will be auto-injected. So don't delete this. Probably don't want to change it. You can still do things like you would do with a normal index.html as far as libraries go, but like if there's a way to npm install it, I like that better, because then it just goes in your package JSON. All of your dependencies are organized there. Cool. So that's public. Change the favicon all you want. I suggest especially if you're deploying something you want to show to other people, it's nice to have the favicon changed so it looks like you took the time to go into those details. So that's a good call.
How do you create a favicon?
Illustrator, Photoshop.
Well, yeah, for sure, but do you need to like give it any specific properties, like the
yeah.
or?
Yes, always that. Great question. Sorry, I was like,
Yeah, no,
are you talking about programs? So it needs to be a .ico file extension, and then I guess that's for icons. I don't really know. And then I think sizes are generally like it's either 16 by 16 or 32 by 32, so they're real tiny.
Cool.
So, and that's just from what I've researched. I might be wrong, so double check me. Yeah, good question. Cool. So now the folder that has all the folders that have all the stuff, the source folder. Very similar to React, right? Yeah, cool. We got assets. This has got our logo in there. So if you want to stick images that you're not trying to like call from other websites or S3 buckets or whatever, shove them in assets. Components. That's where we keep our components. I always like to create a views folder as well. What's the difference between a component and a view? Cool. So the way I think of views is a view is a page, right? a view can have many components in it, right? You treat them the same, right? Because like they're all going to end with the dot view. They're basically going to be components, but it is going to be like my about view, right? It might have like, I don't know, it's probably going to be pretty static, right? I don't need a super dynamic about page, but or like my input page might have a form component and a submit component and a whatever else render component. The view, V-I-E-W, not V-U-E, is kind of like a whole page. And then you can pass components into that. Components, here's our app.view. This is going to be our main component, very similar to React. We've got some stuff in here. We've got this import, which is how we get components into another component. This export default, you see that we have name, doesn't matter. You don't ever need that. But then you have to register your component within this export default statement. All right, here's our style. Template, script, style, in every single component. It is now lunchtime, but before we do that, here's the main.js, which is like our index.js in React. This is the thing that's actually rendering app and shoving it into that app div in our index.html.
Would it normally be called main.js?
It will always, as far as using the Vue CLI, be main.js. Just as in React, if you use create React app, it was, what was it, index.js, right? Yeah. So let's break for lunch. When we come back, I think 1:15. Does that sound good to y'all?
Our sandwiches don't get here till 12:30, so.
So 1:30?
I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying.
I'm asking y'all. I mean, it's really whatever time works for you. You want to shoot for 1:30?
We could shoot for 1:15.
Shoot for 1:15. If anybody's delayed.
Ooh.
I'm fine with that. I mean, I think potentially like we could either go another 30 minutes if you're cool with that, or
Yeah,
like,
doesn't bother me either way.
we can all go out there and just do the meet, greet, and eat quickly.
Meet, greet, and
Yeah, I
eat.
think that's part of it.
Is that the point of the eating? Yeah.
We gotta meet new people.
We're on that.
Yay! All right, cool. So then, 2? Is that generally what I'm hearing? 2? 45? 1:30?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool.
We can eat and greet.
What did we decide?
Eat and meet.
Eat,
At the same time.
eat, meet, greet. Okay, cool. So reconvene. Yeah, 1:30.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank y'all. And I will be uploading all of these things to the stuff.